This is Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. Here are your hosts, Dr. Tim Slecker and Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, educated educators talking education.
Oh, yes, there it is. Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. Educated educators talking education. First downs, Friday nights. Yeah, Johnny Lupinacci. He's got things to do. He's a coach. He's a dad. But I got my friends here, Jess and Jimmy. What's happening, Jess? You first.
Well, we're just taking it one day at a time. You might hear in my voice that, it's cold season, but that's fine. We got Coach K with us. Coach K, how you doing?
Cold season remedy.
There we go.
I'm right there with you.
Okay, well then, thank goodness then we're in screens because I do not need the two of you infecting me. So it is
I'm gonna
first
cough
downs
on you all the way out in Ohio.
Please, in Ohio. It's first downs and Friday night lights. Yeah, it's our special episode, and we are so happy to have Jimmy Koska, Coach Koska here, Coach K joining us again to talk, a little bit about, of course, we're going to talk about fall sports going into winter. But then the other, start away, Jimmy, coming out of the election. And no, we're not going to bemoan Trump because there's enough of that out there. And not to say that we don't want to bemoan him because we do, but we're not going to do it today. But success in Wisconsin, Jimmy, around school referendums, how did they pan out? What was the breakdown? What can you report from Wisconsin on the success of school referendums?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is in the context of, the last few elections that we've had where we've had more than one referendum, you have to understand that, it was great to see 92 of 120 districts get at least one question passed. $3.4 billion worth of referendums did go through. That's how much taxpayers in these districts have allowed their local property taxes, their district to collect beyond the tax levy, the limit set forth by the legislature. So I think right there, just the districts that did get this passed, obviously this is huge because this is facilities, this is keeping the lights on, this is staff salaries, this is keeping your programming going. So for those districts you passed, obviously you feel great. A lot of them passed pretty overwhelmingly. If you look at Madison, for example, they passed a $507 million facilities referendum and a $100 million operational referendum with over 70% of the vote. Just overwhelming numbers to get the vote passed. So I think for those districts, obviously, this is what you have been working towards. And the reason why so many schools waited until the presidential election to ask is that the data that goes back since referendums became a thing in Wisconsin, going back to the 90s, is that the presidential election itself has a much higher rate of passage than any of the other elections or primaries on the calendar. This year, we have seen, and in last year too, we have seen referendum passage rates overall, north of 50%. But, whereas in the past they might be 80 or 90%, we're seeing things closer to like 60%. So when we see, 70-ish% of referendums pass in a presidential election, you're feeling, okay, well, 70% is great. But in context to past presidential elections where they've passed 80, 85, even 90% sometimes, it's a little bit down. And I think expected given that there's been so many, and I think there's some voter fatigue on voting whether they're going to raise their local property taxes to help pay for education.
Yeah, let's, again, just a quick reminder, refresher, the referendum process. This is public school taxpayers voting in favor to pay more taxes to support their local public schools. Why does that happen? Well, in Wisconsin in particular, they are underfunded. You've got a state legislature that has been defunding public schools. And so to make up that gap, the taxpayers go to the ballots asking themselves essentially to say, are we willing to pay more for our kids to have the public schools that they need, the essentials? And yeah, guess what? Friday night football, the band, all those things like that, keeping the lights on. But this is the taxpayers saying, Well, the legislators aren't doing their constitutional duty of fully funding local public schools. I guess it's on us. That's a whole other issue that I know people are saying. It's like, well, it shouldn't be that way. You're right. It shouldn't be that way. But here's the one thing I point at this, though, Jimmy, to look at. It might be down a little bit, as you said, compared 70 some percent. But the reality here is that this tells a story. What this story is that's being told is the incredible support for public education that is out there. So when you hear people talking about, oh, public schools, no, nonsense. Don't fall for that crap. When you have 75, upwards 80% of the taxpayers voting to tax themselves more, this is their support for public schools. So trying to vote against public schools, and people are like, how else can you triangulate that, Tim? Yes, I can triangulate that, because in Kentucky, where they put vouchers to a ballot, guess what? In Kentucky, almost every vote in this election went red, Republican. But when it came to vouchers in Kentucky, it was defeated in a red state. Why? That's because local people, taxpayers, support their public schools. And this is kind of that, this is a statement. So Jimmy, you may point out that it's a little bit lower than it's been in the past for presidential elections. I point this out as a huge win for public education because it demonstrates without a doubt the commitment and the love of everybody's local public schools. If you have that love, 608-557-8577, 608-557-8577. That's the Busted Pencils mailbag. Let us know, if you voted in favor of the referendum, why did you do it? Let us know. If you voted against it, we want to hear from you too. Make sure you give us a call. That number, 608-557-8577. It's Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. It's First Downs and Friday Night Lights. We've got our special guest, Coach K. All right, Coach. What about all this other stuff going on here? Football season's kind of winding down. Playoffs are here, moving into. So update from the gridiron. What's happening in high school football?
High school football is onto the state semifinals in 11-player and the state championship in 8-player. So we are down to the final 30 teams playing as of November 15th, Friday, November 15th. And then the state championships are being held in Camp Randall Stadium the week before Thanksgiving, which will eliminate the final 7 teams to crown 7 state champions at 11-player. Part of all of this year, for the first time in football, is the performance factor. So you're seeing some teams that have had recent success play up divisions, and there's been a mixed bag of success within that. Some of those schools, even up a division, are still going. A few have also fallen off. So this has been kind of the first year of that. And I think one of the big arguments against the tournament performance factor, and then you've seen it more in other sports than football, because football has 7 divisions. So moving up a division isn't quite as drastic as a sport like cross country, where there's only 3 divisions. And there you're seeing schools that have had success in Division 3, the smallest schools. All of a sudden, you're asking a school with an enrollment of 190. They run in Division 2. Well, now they're facing schools that are close to 1,000 in enrollment. And it's those sports where there's been a lot of resistance to this performance factor model. It didn't stop, obviously, individuals in those sports from still competing and still doing well. But for team sports, when you're moving teams up and down where there are fewer divisions, they're seeing a little bit more impact there.
Let me take a bite at this, though, Jimmy, just in case, before we get a little bit further. This performance factor, what I think I hear you saying is that if I'm a smaller school, and my team is really, really good, then I can get bumped up to a division above me because I'm too good to be playing in the division of my team. So from Division 3 to Division 2, and they're saying because we're that much better, we should be competing with bigger schools. Is that the concept?
Yeah, the concept is over the course of 3 years, if you make it to sectionals or state enough times, you accumulate enough points to move up a division. And this was, I don't want to call it a compromise, but this is where membership in the WIAA arrived in trying to figure out a way to balance the field. And I think a lot of this was driven by the fact that private schools have been dominating small school championships, in recent years. We saw it in volleyball this year, where 7 of the 10, I think, in the state finals were private schools. So, that's been really the driver of it. But where it's really affected has been the small rural schools that you might get that wave of student athletes that are really good, and you get them for a couple of years. Well, they bump you up, and then when they leave, it's those students now that got to deal with it and play in those larger divisions. And then obviously it's more challenging. But that's been really the big debate in the playoffs this year. It hasn't been so much other things. That and obviously computer seating have been the two biggest things talked about this year. But since we're down to just football, the computer seating was kind of the big talk there. And I'd like to think that teams have figured that out. But you see some teams that are still playing that were vastly underseeded by the computers. You have an 8 seed playing in a state semifinal Division 6, which is pretty crazy. So there's a big debate on the computer seating too, and not just in football.
Okay, so computer seating, that is, not seating. I was like, wait a minute, you mean computers are telling you where you have to sit at the Friday night football game? No,
not yet.
Not yet. Computer seating. And so, in other words, throwing in all of the participants in the playoffs into some form of a computer algorithmic calculation that then supposedly spits out the brackets in the most, unbiased, objective, computerized way. And guess what? You know what? It's not perfect and it's not clear. And anybody who knows that too, who's been on part of the Twitter X, as we call it here, which is Twitter X, algorithms. Yeah, guess what? You can manipulate them. So I think in these times, a little aside right there, Jimmy. Okay, but so you're talking about football. You made a comment though too. Regular roster 11. Are there playoffs for 8-team football, and how does that work or not, or is that a different beast altogether?
Sure. So 11-player football and 8-player football are treated as separate sports in Wisconsin, as they are in many schools that offer reduced player football. 8-player football was first offered here about 10 years ago. It wasn't sanctioned as a championship sport until a few years ago, but it has become very, very popular, especially in the last few years where it's exploded in growth. What's limiting it right now is that there are two things that kind of cap participation in the playoffs. One is that you have to have a 3-year enrollment average of 200 or under in your high school to be eligible for the playoffs. So for schools that are little over 200 but have that are kind of toying with this idea, if you drop to 8, you're no longer eligible for the playoffs. And the other factor that limits this is that even with this many teams in it, I think we're pushing 70 now, there's still only 16 teams that get to play in the playoffs. So it's a much more exclusive field. There was a team with 2 losses this year that didn't make the playoffs because, again, only 16 teams get in to the postseason in 8-player. So there's push to expand the playoffs there. Whereas you look at 11-player football, you have 224 playoff teams, and I think we're down to about 358-ish teams that are still competing in 11. So the playoff field is much more easier to access, where you could go 3-6 and be in the playoffs. But if you go 6-2 and 8-player, you're left out. So there's a couple of things kind of limiting that growth. But the reality is, Tim, is that with declining enrollment in small schools, I mean, 8-player is going to be the way, because there's just not enough participation to support 11 at a lot of these schools anymore. I think the general rule of thumb is if you can't have a JV team in 11, you should be playing 8.
Absolutely. We agree to that too. And I said, thank you so much for sharing with me too, the 8-player football, because I said I hadn't even heard of it. And it makes perfect sense when you're talking about smaller schools. But now coming into the playoffs, so before, will we know who's the champions before Thanksgiving, after Thanksgiving? How long does it take now to get us to the crowning games?
The Thursday before Thanksgiving is divisions 7 through 4, and then the Friday before Thanksgiving is divisions 3 through 1. So we will know from on November 22nd all 11-player state champions. The 8-player state champions are crowned on November 16th. They play that in Wisconsin Rapids. There's 2 teams playing in that, and then the 11-player finals are held the following Thursday and Friday.
Okay, so there you go. Friday night football, people. You got the breakdown. If you're in the playoffs, congratulations. If you're not, there's always next year. Looking forward to it. But Jimmy, this is also the transition time, because I remember, I played football and I was a wrestler, and at this time too, actually by the time I was a junior, I hadn't gotten much taller. I decided football was out. Little did I know that meant that I could start wrestling practice earlier, though, because wrestling is a winter sport. Still the deal today?
Yep. So in Wisconsin, this week was the start of girls basketball practices, and on Monday, boys basketball and wrestling get underway. Wrestling is also a boys and girls sport now in Wisconsin, as girls wrestling has really taken off. It's tripled its participation in just a few years, and it'll have a team wrestling state championship here in 2027. Right now they have individual. So you've got a lot of winter offerings that have either gotten underway this week or will get underway next week. Hockey also begins here in short order. So you've got winter sports coming up. And what's funny is you mentioned that fall to winter transition. Some of these schools that go deep in the fall in football, for example, well, those wrestling and basketball practices,
Right.
they push those back a couple of weeks. So that's always a fun challenge. We had that in my high school. Our football team would always be playing deep in November. So we tell our basketball coach, like, hey, we love you. We'd love to start practice, but we really hope we don't have to practice until later November because we want to win something in football.
Yeah, and that's always been that. And so, if you're a multiple team player, you recognize this, especially if you're cutting across seasons like that and how that works. But lots going on. Again, teams out there enjoying this, coming out of the fall, getting ready for Thanksgiving, celebrating that, making that transition also to winter sports, wrestling. And just think about this too. If you're out there, I want to do more conversations with the explosion of the girls female wrestling. In fact, we'll put it out there now. If you're listening, 608-557-8577. Give Coach K, me, or Jess a call. Let us know if you'd like to come on Busted Pencils to talk about wrestling. Jimmy, jump in there.
Just want to say the growth is so big in girls wrestling that in my district, locally in my district, we have this year, we have a wrestling program that last year, boys and girls combined, had 11 wrestlers, right? We have 12 girls, just girls, coming out for wrestling for the first time this year for high school wrestling, to the point that the district had to hire another coach just to handle this influx of girls. And we're not the only ones. The sport has, as an alternative to basketball in a lot of small districts, because a lot of districts offer, typically for girls in the winter, you have basketball, and that's pretty much it. At some schools, if you're close enough to a bigger city, you might get a hockey co-op, right? And that's an expensive sport. So wrestling is now kind of filling kind of a void, if you will, of an alternate girls sport. And we're seeing it in smaller schools where that has exploded in growth because you have a team component to it, but there's also that individual part of it.
Yeah.
And having a standalone championship for girls where, for the first couple of years of individual, sometimes you could enter your weight bracket and you be in sectionals by virtue of there not being enough competitors. Well, that ain't the case anymore because there are a lot of girls wrestling. And I'm just saying anecdotally, just speaking from where I'm at, having our district at 12 first-time wrestlers is pretty crazy, but it's also not unheard of now, as we're hearing other schools are now fielding their own girls-only teams, girls-only events in wrestling around the state. It is amazing.
Oh, man. It's First Downs Friday Night Lights. Special guest, Coach K, Jimmy Koska, and Jess. Man, always loving this. But you know what? Now it's time for your moment of Zen. History can untie our minds, our bodies, our disposition to move, to engage life rather than contemplating it as an outsider. Thanks again for listening. First Downs Friday nights every Friday. Make sure you jump in, staying connected to Civic Media. Saturday, 3 o'clock, Busted Pencils. And then you have the following week, Monday, Homeroom, Wednesday, classes in session. Check it out, too. And if you have any comments, remember the Busted Pencils mailbag, 608-557-8577, 608-557-8577. Leave us a message. And remember, all weekend, keep busting pencils.